back to another episode of EV Charging Chat. I'm your host, Tony Booth, and the founder of Stay in Charge, bringing you this weekly podcast so we can help share information and knowledge of best practices, common things, ways to get the most out of EV charging in the commercial industry, commercial real estate industry space. So today we are continuing on with our series about the 6 key aspects when designing the proper system. As you know, we've been through 4 already. This is number 5. We're going to talk about local and specific requirements. Before I jump in, though, I want to give a quick shout out announcement on a little side thing that you might have seen pop up on this podcast trail or subscription or service as you're watching. We have our EV charging incentive quick takes that we've been doing. So I have started creating a single podcast or short podcast. It's a couple minutes long, but we're doing one for every single state that has incentives so that everybody out there can quickly search, find their state, listen to see what's available. So we have some really good information out there, getting out, showing people what's going on, telling you what's available in all these incentives. And I want to make sure everybody gets that information so that they take advantage of it as soon as possible. Some of that stuff is going away as it runs out of money. Some of it goes away as politics change. Some of it may be on the chopping block right now for the end of this year. So if you're in commercial real estate, you think you're going to need EV charging anytime soon, don't sleep on those incentives. So you'll see those are popping up on this trail. You can also find them on our YouTube page. If you go to our YouTube channel, the Stay in Charge YouTube channel, you'll see them on there as well. So make sure you check that out. Your state should be coming if it's not there already. We're into the C's or D's right now. So we got a little ways to go, but we'll get those all out. So just want to let everybody know about that. So back to today's topic. We are, again, continuing on with the key things that we look at with each of our partners as we design a system for their property. So in this particular aspect today, we're talking about kind of local or other requirements that are out there. So this gets into, can be several things, right? It could be requirements by your power company, could be requirements by your municipality or your jurisdiction, your authority having jurisdiction over your building codes, zoning codes, things like that. It could be state requirements. It could be ADA requirements. It could be fire code requirements. So there are a lot of things that could get into this from a government legal perspective, but we also know that depending on what type of property you have and who, how it all works, you might have some other things. You might have brand standards. You might have laws related to HOAs or things like that can get into play here. So that's where we're talking about of all these different requirements, because we know as we're getting in and designing a system at a property that we need to meet all these different requirements and need to make sure we're fulfilling them. And another big one is incentives, right? We talked about that earlier, the incentives and the rebates. Well, as you look at each of these different rebates and different programs that are out there, there are certain requirements. If you're looking at, like in this instance, because Alabama was one that was just released, they have a program through Alabama Power, but you have to use there's a certain list of chargers that you have to make sure you buy a charger off of that list. So these are all requirements that are going to impact the design of your system. So we're going to talk through each one of those. And I'm going to start, since we just mentioned it, the incentive side. So we'll start with the federal, right? Okay, federal right off the bat, 30C, they got a 30% tax credit that you can get back if you install EV charging in 2025. If your property qualifies, there are some qualifications. But if you've qualified, okay, that's the first step. But the second step is there are some requirements as you install this system Uh, those won't get into necessarily the design of the system, but the design could impact the results, right? So on the federal side, they require that you pay prevailing wage and you use an apprentice. Well, those things can add cost to your project. So if you have a very labor intensive project, it's going to add cost. So we want to make sure we're planning on all that. Um, as you look at other rebates, whether it's state or utility or some other things like that, we can get into certain requirements um, that are related more so to the equipment, um, the chargers, the software, the things that you agree to, uh, the things that are part of the parking and things like that. So in Colorado, they got a great incentive program, but one of the caveats they put in there is one location must be built accessible. So when we do a project in Colorado, we actually have to take up one of the parking stalls, or we have to put it into an existing handicap space because there has to be accessible charging. So that's the incentive side requiring that, not necessarily the local code requirements. So one may override the other. So we got to make sure of that. New Jersey and some of these others have specific reporting requirements. So in New Jersey, we have to send specific reports every quarter to them. Other places you get reporting, you have to agree to report, but they'll ask you for the information. So that gets involved in it. There could be requirements that require you to use a specific software because your software may have to do certain things to comply with that rebate program. So as you're designing a system, as you're looking at that, you want to make sure that you understand any incentives that you're going for and make sure you're checking those boxes that you meet those requirements. Okay. So that's one spot. The next spot we'll get into is we'll talk about like general building codes. We all know those are the codes that are going to tell us how many handicap spaces we need. Typically, they're going to tell us how many parking spaces we need based on the size of our building or the number of apartment complexes or the number of rooms, right? All that comes into our general building codes or our zoning codes, those kind of things. So those can have a big impact on what's required as you're developing your charging solution. It's not as prevalent throughout the entire United States yet, but we are starting to see, especially on the West Coast, it's already there. If you're building a commercial space on the West Coast, if you're getting into multifamily, retail, mixed use, anything like that, you're going to see that you have to have so many spaces dedicated for EV charging. Colorado is another one. We were just working on a project that's a multifamily condominium complex, and the code there required that they install so many chargers day one. They have so many spaces that are what they call EV charger ready, which means they have wire pulled to them. And then they had to have so many spaces that were EV charger capable, which means they had to have conduit there. So they have all these different codes. So that particular project, I think we're installing 6 chargers, but they actually had to prepare for another 6 where the wire's ready to go, and another 12 after that to have just conduit there ready to go. So your codes are going to dictate a lot of things on this going forward. So make sure that your engineers, your architects that are doing anything with new builds are paying attention to that to make sure you're there. Another place your codes may come into play is in upgrades or add-ons. So some jurisdictions that we work with, when we reach out and say, hey, we're going to install some EV chargers, is there anything we need to know specific with you? And they'll be like, nah, just send us in some one lines and, that's an electrical upgrade. It's not a big deal. We don't need a bunch of stuff from you. But other ones will go, well, wait a minute. Yes, we need to take this over to this group because they need to look at your parking and decide, oh, you need to have accessible space here. So you're going to have to put a charger in accessible space. So some of them will have requirements, others won't. So if you're, as you're looking at this and you're designing a system, if you're not familiar, then you might want to reach out to your local jurisdiction and just say, that you're thinking about adding EV chargers. You're not sure what's required, and let them answer to you what's required so that you know that you're going to meet those requirements and not get into trouble down the road, right? Because the last thing you want to do is go spend all this money putting a few chargers in to find out that we should have put an accessible space in, which now you're, jackhammering out some concrete and digging up conduit, moving chargers around to meet the accessible design. Ends up costing you double because we didn't do that homework up front. So make sure you're checking on your codes, what the requirements are, and even especially my fast charging customers out there, we've got to be real careful of what we're doing, because you're almost like adding another gas pump. So some places may look at that and say, well, wait a minute, do you have the accessibility? You're getting ready to take up a parking stall. If you say that that's for EV charging, what about if somebody is not driving an EV? Now you don't have enough parking spaces. So we have to be real careful on the convenience store side and places like that to make sure we're understanding what those codes are. There's a lot of ways to meet the codes, and a lot of companies are very flexible. Here's another one we ran into the other day. So just so that to kind of think about, we had an inspector come out on one of our projects looking at the electrical work, and he was looking at the breakers, and based on the panel and the breakers, if all four of our chargers were to be kicked on at the same time, we would overload. We had the potential to overload the panel. And the way he explained it is we consider EV chargers as a constant load, which is true. That's how we look at them too. They are a constant load. What he wasn't aware of is that we have software that does load management. So initially he was getting ready to deny the inspection, right? To give them a bad inspection because he felt that they were overloading the panel. And once we explained to him that we use this power management software and he was able to understand that, he was like, oh, okay, so you can maximize the load to this. And we were able to show that, and he signed off on it. So that's a code requirement that as a continuous load, you can't overload your panel. Like you can't put, typically on a 100 amp panel, you can put 200 amps worth of breakers on it because you don't have continuous light loads and all this stuff. But with an EV charger, you can't put 200 amps of EV chargers on a 100 amp panel because it's a continuous full load when they click on. So we have to have power management, and we had to make sure you understood that. So make sure you understand those things. Going into it up front, understanding what your codes are, what the resist, helps us put the right system requirements together. All right. So that's a big deal there. So moving on to another aspect of requirements is your HOA or local community requirements. Okay. Or your brand. So this kind of falls into two kind of categories, right? If you think about multifamily, we often run into HOAs, different kind of setups of different communities, and there's community charters and rules and guidelines for them to go by. So we want to make sure that we're complying with any of that, and that we're building a system that will meet that. HOAs gets really tricky when you start looking at like a condo complex with, let's say, a parking garage, and if you have deeded parking, if you have limited kind of spare parking to add community charging, then how do you go about meeting the requirements in a deeded parking facility to where you can meet the right to charge laws and things like that? So that community requirements may play into how we design your system and what we put in there, or our HOA bylaws that may play into laws that are not necessarily code, by building code, but they're a whole separate law that's out there in these right to charge laws that you see coming up everywhere. Which basically what that's saying, and I'll do a podcast on this in the future all about it because it's important to know. But the right to charge laws are basically they're saying that you cannot deny a resident the ability to install an EV charger in these certain states. Now, they can have to pay for it. You can give them guidelines. You can give them rules that they have to follow. You can even tell them that they have to hire me to put the chargers in. But you can't tell them that they can't. You can't deny them that. So again, that's a whole nother podcast. But make sure that you're aware of that. You talk to somebody so that you don't, start out designing a system that you end up finding out that based on your HOA scenario and the laws in your state does not comply with a right to charge scenario. So that's a big thing to pay attention to, those type of requirements. And then on the other side of this that we put in the same bucket is what we call our brand requirements. Now, obviously, many of you know we do a lot of hospitality. We do hundreds of hotels. So we are very familiar with brand standards when it comes to putting stuff in at a hotel. Pretty much anything you do at a hotel has some type of brand standard associated with it, from the towels to the lighting to everything. Like some of it has real strict, other parts are maybe not less strict as who the vendor is, but they will tell you that you have to do these certain things. So there are requirements, there are standards that are set by all the brands on the hotel side. And I'm sure that as this EV charging market grows, you're going to start to see this come out from those of you that are in franchises like quick serve restaurant franchises and any place else where we're going to start seeing this growth in EV charging and the ability to attract new guests, new residents, new customers by putting in EV charging. You're going to have these brands, whether it's like a Dunkin' Donuts or somebody like that, they're going to come out and say, okay, we don't care if you put charging in, but here's the standards that you have to abide by. And those are going to have an impact. Some of them can have a huge impact in the system you design. We know that we've been through it with some of the hotel brands, and probably 50-60% of the charging that's installed in some places will not pass current brand standards. Now, obviously, they might have been installed before those standards were enacted, so they're kind of grandfathered. But at some point, they're going to have to upgrade that stuff. And why make that mistake of getting the wrong system installed today, only to find out, oh, we didn't comply with this brand standard, and now you're like, oh, calling up your vendor saying, hey, we need this particular feature, and they go, whoa, we can't do that with that charger. So you need to buy a new charger. So make sure that we're understanding all those things, what those requirements are, because they can have an impact in your charging solution. And also what we recommend to everybody is make sure you're looking at that out in the future. Okay. We can see the writing on the wall with certain things. Okay. Like it's probably not long over time in the next 5, 6, 8 years that the brands start mandating that you give free charging to top tier loyalty members. It's just something that will probably happen because that's what happens in these scenarios, just like Wi-Fi. So when that happens 3 or 4 years from now, who's responsible for that? Is that you? Is it that your charging company, right? If they come out and say, oh, we want it directly tied into your loyalty programs, who's going to do all that work? Is that something that your supplier is going to do, or is that something now you're stuck with the bill? So make sure we're kind of looking at those things. Again, on the HOA side, this is where that right to charge law can really hurt you. You sit back today and do nothing, or maybe you sit today and look at it and say, you know what, I heard Tony talk about this. We're going to put a program together. So you do that, but don't realize that there's somebody over here or something in the standard rules or laws that you miss in your plan, and all of a sudden you're caught. Like you got a plan, but it's no good anymore because when your legislature enacts those laws, it kind of like, oh no, we got to upgrade this. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to those requirements. And I know, again, in all this, right, I can't give you concrete yes, no answers in this particular aspect because it varies every single, like I can drive up I-95, 40 miles and get to a new town, and the rules can be completely different. So this is one area that I can't touch. I can't even come close to touching on everything. Even when we give out proposals and we start working with somebody, we definitely tell them up front, there's still some caveats until we get full approval. We may not know final cost because we might base everything off of our current understanding, do the proposal, get everything going, and then when we finally get drawings into the municipality or the city, all of a sudden they come back and say, oh, whoa, hold on. We interpret this to mean this, and you need to install this new separate circuit for that, and it needs to be in its own panel. So we don't always know what's going to happen. It's very locally dependent. So the main takeaway from today is know these things are happening, know these things are out there. So as you're designing your system, whether you're doing it on your own, working with a company, make sure that everybody's paying attention to what these things are. Okay, because I can promise you that there's companies out there that are going to give you a quote. They're not going to include anything to keep you compliant. They're just going to say, oh, you want chargers? Here you go. Here's your chargers. And when you realize that those chargers don't meet your code, you're going to call them up and they're going to, oh, well, we never said it was XYZ compliant. We just told you it was a level 2 charger and you bought it. What do you want us to do? Are they going to take them back? Probably not, because if you already installed them and you used them, they're going to go, oh, that's used equipment now, right? They don't owe you anything. They misled you. Maybe they did the wrong thing, obviously, but truth is they gave you a spec. They gave you a proposal with that spec. You bought that charger and that spec. If that spec didn't meet your requirements, I guarantee nobody had it in writing that they would meet your local codes. So be careful with this stuff. Make sure you're asking those questions. And if you're not sure, as with anything, if you're not sure anytime, okay, first of all, on most of these things, if you're not sure, go to your local jurisdiction, first of all, and ask them. And if you're talking about some of these legal things, go to your attorney, especially you HOAs that are out there, and then like your apartment and community type people. Have your legal team take a look at some of the things that might be coming down the pike to make sure you comply. And then also, you can always reach out to us. We're here to help. Again, there's so many laws and rules that I can't give you. If you called me up and said I'm in, wherever, Kansas, right? Miriam, Kansas, or something like that, I probably would not know exactly what you need to do. Now, I may have done some other work in Kansas and say, well, these other 3 properties, we didn't have to do this, this, or this, but you still need to talk to your city specifically. So those are the things that we really need to be careful of designing these systems, just to save from coming back and fixing something or replacing something or changing something out, because rework is expensive and we don't want to see you do that. So anytime you got questions, as always, we're here to help. You can reach me directly. You can reach my team, stayincharge.com, or send an email, sales@stayincharge.com. We're always here to help out, answer questions, and keep you headed in the right direction. So that's it for today. Hope you learned something new about EV charging in commercial real estate, and we'll see you next week.